Thank you, Juliet. I also want to thank the German Marshall Fund for putting on this debate and for Tim for being so generous as to give me both the first and the last word. I hope he won't regret that. Anyway, I'm really looking forward to the discussion. So we have a lot on our plate for the next few decades. We have to learn how to diversify transportation fuels and end the role that petroleum plays in the world, which is largely a disruptive one. We need to provide food for a population that will be getting wealthier, and that means it has meant in the past eating more meat and dairy. Figure out how to control greenhouse gases and limit other human emissions. We need to also figure out how to increase economic opportunities for the poor communities throughout the world. By and large, the economic prosperity and growth that we've seen in the last few decades has bypassed rural areas, both in the United States and elsewhere. Biofuels have a lot to contribute to each of these areas, I think particularly cellulosic biofuels. Unfortunately, some of the recent analysis, including the indirect land use analysis, sees biofuels as part of the problem, not part of the solution. So it's helpful to review some of the reasons why we're making biofuels. Since the 1970s, it's been congressional policy to use biofuels to use up some of the surplus agricultural commodities, specifically to increase crop prices, to reduce our dependence on imported oil, also since the 70s. I've been around all that time. And for the last few years, another very appropriate, important goal, to use biofuels to reduce greenhouse gases and provide other environmental services. Biofuels do, in fact, accomplish all these objectives. They do reduce the direct greenhouse gas emissions. Every study of the direct greenhouse gas emissions of biofuels, we'll talk about this difference between direct and indirect, shows they do reduce GHGs compared to diesel and gasoline. They do reduce dependence on imported oil. They do increase agricultural commodity prices, and they help rural communities. That's well established. It's a little late to discover that biofuels are at least partially designed to increase crop prices. They have always had that objective. That has always been part of congressional policy, to increase crop prices. So I'm pointing you, this arrow marks the spot. Okay, this is a description, a graphical view, if you will, of land use change. It's from Michael O'Hare's work at Berkeley, one of the analysts working on indirect land use change. So the idea here, so that you'll be clear on this, if a U.S. corn farmer switches from corn soy to more corn to be able to provide more corn for the growing biofuels market, U.S. soy exports may go down and world soy prices would rise. Because of this price mechanism, okay, indirect effects are all mediated by price. They're all market effects, market-driven effects, or market or policy. We'll talk about policy in a moment. This increased prices then would help drive, so the theory goes, that you might put additional land into, for instance in Brazil, into soy production, and that clearing of the land would generate a carbon debt. In other words, the burning of the trees or the plowing of the soil would release a lot of greenhouse gases that then would count against the greenhouse gas score of the biofuels. So it's this indirect greenhouse gas emission that leads to a very large carbon debt. So listen, really important things to note here. Okay, it's important that you get this clear, let me make this clear. Indirect land use change is not part of the biofuels carbon footprint. It is part of a carbon footprint of another product, corn or soy or whatever else is being produced somewhere else in the world, that is being proposed for inclusion in the biofuel carbon footprint. It is not part of the supply chain. By definition, it's not part of the biofuel supply chain. It's part of another product's supply chain that's being proposed for inclusion. Okay, so it's outside of the system boundary for the biofuel. So just again to try to compare and contrast here, direct land use change is supply chain oriented. You have a specific defined system. You can identify and hold responsible individual actors in the system. It's data driven, okay? You have real situations described. It's testable in real time. It's actually grounded in reality. Indirect land use change, I'm not trying to be pejorative here, but as accurate as I can be. It's market oriented and the whole world is the system. There are no individual actors, okay? No one is quote unquote responsible. If you want to say it, it's the economy's fault, okay? The devil or the economy made me do it. Sorry about that, I didn't mean to push that. So it's model and assumption driven. There are hypothetical situations described, scenarios. It's not truly testable because you're working in the future. Something I want to emphasize, and I'll come back to it, indirect land use change, by its nature, shifts the responsibility for the actual generation of the greenhouse gases from those who actually generate the greenhouse gases to the biofuel producer, okay? The polluter doesn't pay. The person who actually cuts down, the guy in the Amazon with the chainsaw and a can of gas, is not the one who pays. The biofuel producer is assessed that greenhouse gas responsibility, and for whatever the land is used for in the Amazon or wherever else, that escapes greenhouse gas accounting, okay, because it's already been assessed against the biofuel. So I believe the fundamental premise of indirect land use change is wrong, okay? We can debate the specifics, and I'll talk a little bit more about the specifics, but the price increases drive the model and indirect land use change. Therefore, any increase in agricultural prices is bad, according to indirect land use change, because it will drive this land clearing. Conservation programs such as the CRP are also bad, quote unquote, because they take land out of production. They are designed to do so, and therefore they raise prices. You should never convert domestic agricultural land to forest and grassland, okay? Because if doing so, you take land out of production, you tend to raise crop prices, and you drive indirect land use change somewhere else. These are consequences of the thinking, the premise of indirect land use change. Again, I contend that the premise of indirect land use change is wrong. Agricultural communities around the world should stay poor forever. Some consequences of indirect land use, indirect effects analysis, okay? And Congress didn't say just indirect land use change, they said indirect effects directly. But what this makes then is domestic industries are responsible for the environmental performance of their competitors around the world. We don't hold any other of our industries to that kind of responsibility. Another effect of the way the analysis is carried out is that existing uses of land, which are mostly for animal feed, are protected versus any new uses. It undermines the value of life cycle analysis, something about which I'll say more in a moment. Applied consistently, if we apply indirect effects consistently, it will undermine our attempts to provide any replacements to petroleum, any and all replacements to petroleum. I'm going to show you why that's the case here in a moment. So let's apply indirect effects analysis, for example, to electric vehicles. Let's power, the idea here, let's power our battery. Now, I happen to support, by the way, sustainable electrically powered vehicles. I think we need all the transportation fuels we can get, including sustainable electricity. I think we need all the sustainable solutions we can come up with. So I think we should not throw out any of them, including biofuels. But here's the way the analysis provided. Let's power our battery electric vehicles with electricity from wind or solar. Sounds like it would be great for greenhouse gas benefits, doesn't it? Okay, it would. On the direct effects, it would. But by the magic of indirect effects analysis, I'm going to show you it have a huge permanent indirect greenhouse gas emissions. Here's the logic, okay? Apply the same logic, the same thinking that's just been applied to biofuels and apply it here to battery electric vehicles. Battery electric vehicles drive up demand for electricity, or it would be grain in the case of biofuels, right? The market responds to this increase in the demand for electricity by replacing that electricity, okay? Prices rise, more production, okay? For example, like we generate most of our electricity with a coal or natural gas burning power plant, and the comparison there is clearing new land. Those indirect effects, because you've increased the demand for electricity by a battery electric vehicle, you've now increased the demand for coal burning power plants. And if we include the same system boundaries for battery electric vehicles that we have just applied for biofuels, you now account for the emissions of that coal burning power plant that was constructed to take into account, to provide the additional electricity that your battery electric vehicle just took off the market, okay? I think the logic is inescapable. Doesn't matter if your battery electric vehicle, your BEV, is actually powered by wind or solar, okay? Doesn't matter if your actual vehicle was powered by sustainably produced biofuel. Thus, by indirect effects analysis then, we have these, I can't see it either, okay? Large negative greenhouse gas consequences, and I believe this can if we accept the logic of indirect effects analysis, it's going to undermine all of our attempts to provide replacements for petroleum.